I'm Lainey Law.
And I'm attorney Andrew Myers.
On today's episode of About the Law, we're going to be talking about distracted driving, the law, and what people do anyways. Andrew, where are you? It's time to start the podcast.
I'm in a hurry. I got off to a late start. I'll be there.
You're always in a hurry. Oh my God, it's not good when you're driving. You need to chill. What are you doing right now?
Oh, a friend just texted me. I've got to get back to them.
You're texting and driving? It's a good thing that our viewers can't see you right now. We were supposed to meet like a half hour ago to go over this week's topic.
I know, but we can talk now.
I wrote out a production outline and it's here. We have to go over it. This week's topic is distracted driving.
Yeah, I know. Terrible. I can't believe the stuff people do when they're supposed to be paying attention driving their car.
I can't believe you did all of that while you were driving.
Well, I just want to remind our audience that no animals were hurt in the production of this video. Obviously, we did not actually go on the road and do all those horrible things. It was just intended. Maybe we're not the best actors in the world, but it was intended to be dramatic and make a point.
And I think you did make a point. I think a lot of people have seen similar situations to that. And, anybody who's driving, somebody's driving like a maniac, you turn over and they're doing something usually that they're not supposed to be doing.
I walk a lot and my office is right on an intersection. Both of my offices are right near intersections. And I go out the door and I see people, they're not even stopped at the red light and they're texting. They have their phone right up on the wheel. They are talking on the phone. I've seen people eating behind the wheel. It's just crazy the things you see.
Mm-hmm. I have definitely had some friends, probably shouldn't have confessed things like this, but I've had a friend mention to me that on long drives she gets bored, so she's scrolling through reading Facebook articles, things like that. Is just chances are, and if you're the friend in that situation, you definitely hey, that's not good. Definitely tell the people in your life that it's not appropriate. But we've all seen it happen, and a lot of us have been in the car with someone and seen it happening, and sometimes we don't stand up for ourselves when we should, but it's unfortunately very common.
Unfortunately, you're right. It is very common, and we're going to be looking at some of the laws regarding distracted driving in just a minute. And there have been a lot of efforts to get people to stop. As we're going to see in the next few minutes, people just haven't stopped. For example, nearly 1/3 of all U.S. drivers between the ages of 18 to 64 read or send text or email messages while driving. That was according to a poll done by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. The same poll indicated that reading or sending text or email messages while driving and other distracted driving behaviors lead to more than 420,000 injuries every year and more than 3,100 deaths each year in the United States. Simply knowing the tasks and the risks of distracted driving has not yet translated into reducing this behavior. I find that crazy that, we've seen a lot of ads on TV, newspaper stories and all of that about all of the distracted driving laws that have been passed in the last decade, and it's had little or no impact at all.
Mm-hmm. And I remember too, growing up, there were and I haven't seen this in a long time, but it's you used to go into the stores, to get a new phone, and there's stickers, and it's don't text and drive. And it's anytime, whether you're texting, whether you have your hand on your drink, whenever you're doing something that's not just focusing on the road, it can be dangerous, in any situation, and you're putting yourself and putting other people at harm unnecessarily. Now, New Hampshire has a hands-free law. That hands-free law prohibits use of any handheld mobile electronic devices while driving, stopped in traffic, or at a light. That includes viewing or posting messages, conducting conversation, accessing the internet, inputting GPS, holding cell phone or other electronic devices. And now, some exceptions to that would be, if you're pulled off to the side of the road or if you're calling 911 or some type of law enforcement. Now, the penalties for that at the first time offense, you're looking at $100 plus a penalty assessment. Once you reach your second offense, you're going to be reaching $250 plus that same penalty assessment. Any subsequent offenses after that, you're looking at $500 plus that penalty assessment. Now, if you're under 18, no electronics. Can't have any electronics, even hands free, with the exception of 911. All of the above penalties apply, plus, you could have your license suspended or revoked. But what is okay under the age of 18, if you're using a hands free GPS or if you're using like a two-way radios, that's only one hand only. Now, New Hampshire's hands free law was passed in 2014 and became effective January 1st, 2015.
Yeah, I remember when that went into effect, there was a lot of publicity. I mean, the newspapers and the TV stations all ran stories, talking about here's the new law, don't do it. They made it sound like a very serious thing. And I'm not saying that it's not a very serious thing, but it was like a top headline that we heard about all the time. And we actually heard statistics about how many people were being pulled over by the police. Before we did this podcast, I actually did a little bit of research, and it seems like most states have similar laws. They're not all the same, but most states have passed various versions of the law you just read. Massachusetts has had a more evolving law. It's a little bit different, but let's take a look at it. In Massachusetts, the hands-free law prohibits drivers from holding, using, speaking on any electronic device unless it is in the hands-free mode. It prohibits reading or viewing text, images, or video displayed on a mobile electronic device. Using a GPS is okay under the Mass law as long as the device is mounted on or affixed to a vehicle's windshield, dashboard, or center console in a manner that does not impede the operation of the motor vehicle. The Massachusetts law also says that an operator shall not be considered to be operating a motor vehicle as long as the vehicle is stationary and not located in a part of the public way intended for travel by a motor vehicle or bicycle. In Massachusetts, use of a mobile electronic device in response to an emergency is an affirmative defense to an alleged violation. So that's a little bit different from the New Hampshire law. And the other thing, that the dollar amounts in Mass are the same as New Hampshire, but for a first offense, the fine is $100, but it's not a surchargeable offense. For the second offense in Massachusetts, $250, but it's not a surchargeable offense. Any subsequent offense, $500 fee, and it is a surchargeable event. So in Massachusetts, they fine you more and more every time you do it. But the bad thing about most stops is that your insurance rates go up. And so Massachusetts, I guess, says you can do it twice without hitting your insurance surcharge. But the third time, you're going to get an insurance surcharge.
Okay. That's interesting to me that they would give you the exception for the first two times. I guess, like, when I think about it a lot of the time, too, like, if you're driving and you're paying attention, it's just like a lot of the times you're going to see those cops, like, way before they're ever going to be hitting you with a ticket. So it's interesting to me, I guess, that it's not a surchargeable event, especially when you consider the fact that it's just like this is impeding you so much that it's just like you're not even noticing, like, these typically obvious
Mm.
situations.
Don't you think that the police, unfortunately, have been subject to what they've been subjected to in the last number of years? And I mean, with the defund the police movement and all kinds of other things that have really not been positive for police, don't you think that a lot of times, I'm not going to say this isn't a priority, but don't you think that they are having other issues that present themselves to the police besides just pulling people over for texting and driving?
And I guess that's like a good point too, where it's like, especially as like we hold these resentment for the cops, it's like they're pulling you over for like texting and driving forever, and all these people are just like, oh my god, like there's actual crimes and stuff happening, and it is like really frustrating too. But I think like most of us have seen is just like sometimes you look on the road and like these people are just like in and out of lanes, they're switching lanes without blinkers, probably because they're not noticing that anything's like that they're even drifting, and then once they're drifted they're like, oh, I'll go to this lane and stuff like that. So it's like frustrating to be pulled over for what feels like a minor thing, but at the same time, it's just like some of these people can cause a lot of actual harm. I actually have some facts here, and it's hard to consider, but like when you're driving a car going 55 miles per hour, you're going 80 feet per second, and sending or receiving a text takes on average, 4.6 seconds, which doesn't really feel like a lot, but in that like span of time you're going so far so fast, like we talked about before. It's like you're not noticing the other things happening, you're not noticing police officers, you're not noticing maybe the other person is driving a little bit wonky. And then at 55 miles per hour, your car is traveling 100 yards, the same length of a football field. It's just like there's just so much different stuff going on. It's a hazard not only to yourself, it's a hazard to other people, it's a hazard to your car, it's a hazard, like we talked about, like to your insurance. Your charges are going to go up. A lot of it's just not worth it. It's just like a lot of the time it's like you're driving what, 10 minutes, 30 minutes. It's not waiting to send that text message. It's not a life for death situation.
You know, how I look at it is that, you just said that for the 4.6 seconds that it takes you to look down at a text, you go 100 yards. That's a lot. Here's how I look at it. You go on vacation. I don't know about you, but you save up all your money for a long period of time to go on a nice vacation, and you work really hard to get time off from your boss. So you finally are going on that nice vacation, and you get on the airplane, and that airplane is hurtling down the runway at 600 miles an hour to take off, or however fast they are. I'm not a pilot, obviously. Do you want the pilot of that plane that you're sitting on? Do you want him looking down at a text, or do you want him, reaching across the aisle for a cup of coffee or looking away? Do you want the pilot like doing something like that, or do you want him looking right at the runway and paying 100% attention to that plane?
And it's like funny that you even bring it up like that. There's so many people that are even afraid to get into planes. It's just like, meanwhile, those same people are going to be the same people distracted driving. And a lot of the times you feel like you're in power because you're the one like behind the wheel. But like Andrew just said, is just like, you don't want to live in a world where these people driving these multi-ton vehicles are driving at you distracted. It's like you don't want your plane driver to do it. You shouldn't be doing it yourself, and you shouldn't want to live in a world where other people are doing it either. And a lot of the times it doesn't really feel like a big deal because it's just like, oh, like I can multitask. Like what's the problem with multitasking? Psychologists say that the human mind does not multitask, but instead task switches, going from one task to another. When you think that you're able to just, oh, give me a second, I can drive and send this text message, it's like, how are you looking at your phone? How are you knowing what you're sending? And how are you paying attention to what's on the road? A lot of the times you'll be at home doing something and somebody will talk to you or somebody will say something and it's like, huh, what did you say? Because you can't do multiple things at once. It a lot of the times with our stressful day-to-day lives, it feels like you can multitask, but you're going to be doing whatever task you're focusing on best. um, Psychologists also say that human cognitive ability does not allow focus on one more than one task, and that, if you've ever been trying to study, get something done, build something, when you're focusing, you're putting all your energy in that, it's going to go a lot smoother. Task switching can lead to mental overload. Being able to switch between tasks can be helpful, but conflicts with the ability to focus on one thing. Continuous focus is required to safely drive a car. And I think with task overload, that kind of goes along with just so much stress that happens to us on a day to day basis. You don't need that extra stress of getting into your car and then worrying about texting your friend, oh, I'm on my way. If you forgot to text them, when you left, you can pull over. You're going to make yourself more stressed out the more things you're trying to do at once.
No, that's a really good point. I've always felt myself, and it's not a very popular view, but I've always felt that people that say, oh, I'm a great multitasker, don't do any one of the tasks all that well. And I've actually heard management and administrative types say the same thing, that as much as they want their employees to be very efficient and effective, that if they're doing 4 or 5 things at the same time, they're not doing any one of those things really well. And from the psychological point of view, what the psychologists are saying is that we don't multitask in that we're doing two things simultaneously. We're switching tasks. I mean, you can do the laundry and cook dinner and yell at the kids all at the same time because, you put the laundry in, then you yell at the kids, then you cook dinner, and you can switch back. You're switching back and forth, but you can't really multitask. You can't do three things like land an airplane at Logan International Airport at the same time as you're turning around to grab a cup of coffee and oops, I spilled it in the co-pilot. So the other thing that's really striking about all of this is that despite all of the attention, it really has not made a difference. The National Law Review very, very recently wrote an article, and their conclusion was that, quote, even with many states passing the anti-texting laws which prohibit a driver from texting while driving, the number of car accidents caused by a negligent driver texting while driving has not decreased. Simply put, these laws have not been as effective as hoped in preventing this behavior.
And I can totally see where that's coming from. I had mentioned before that before when I would go to the store to get a new phone as a kid, they have like all these, oh, don't text and drive stickers. And I had mentioned before, well, not on the podcast, but separately, that growing up, I wasn't old enough to drive at the time. So I was probably around 14, 15 years old. And I did have a friend who was old enough to drive. In the middle of driving, she tells me, hey, hold on to the steering wheel. I have to answer this text. I was a kid. In hindsight, oh my God. Like, obviously, I never got into the car with her again. But it's just like, I guess props to her. She let someone else drive while she was sending the text. But it's just, there's nothing that's going on that's that important. And it's just like, this is back in the times where it was like a huge campaign against this stuff. And it's just like, now you drive around, it's just like you see people texting and driving all the time. I've been in the car with people's parents who will text with both hands on the wheel in a car with two people, with two passengers. So it's sad to see that nothing has really made a significant difference.
No, it is sad. I've seen all kinds of different distracted driving behavior. I used to commute into Boston every day, about a 45-mile drive that could take an hour and a half or 2 hours. But some of the things that I saw were incredible. I couldn't believe driving down on Route 93, seeing people reading a paperback book, reading a tabloid newspaper. I mean, here we are in stop and go traffic, some of the worst traffic that there is in the world on an interstate, because you don't know when it's going to stop if you're moving. You don't know when it's going to start if you're stationary. And I've actually seen people with the newspaper on their steering wheel. I've seen people read a paperback on their steering wheel while driving on the interstate, the expressway into the city. I've seen people doing their makeup. I've seen people, eating. I've seen some other things that maybe we can or can't even comment on here. We'll talk about that later, but it's just amazing some of the stuff that you see. Earlier you mentioned that in the time that it takes you on average to read a text, 4.6 seconds, at 55 miles an hour, you are going the length of a football field. There's actually a New Hampshire case where very sadly just that exact thing happened. Up on Route 28 in the town of Pittsfield, which is a little town about halfway between Concord and Rochester, a little bit closer to Concord. On Route 28, which in that area is a 3-lane road, one northbound lane, one southbound lane, and one very wide lane in the middle for turning in either direction. And that lane is marked on either side with two large, bold yellow lines. Well, one time it was dark. It was in the evening, and an SUV, a very large SUV, was driving in one direction, and all of a sudden veered across that large center lane, struck another car, took out the side of the other car, the young boy that was in the car was found laying in a field. He had a traumatic brain injury. He had his eye socket taken out, and he had a permanent deformity and fracture of his jaw. And the driver of the SUV he actually admitted that he had taken his eyes off the road to look at a text. Now, later on, the police took a look at his phone records, and they didn't indicate any telephone usage at that time. So what the man had said, though, was that he actually looked at a text. So as you get texts, you don't like always look at them right away. He actually didn't have anything immediate or imminent that he had received the text. He was just driving on Route 28 in New Hampshire and decided to look down, look at a text, and he crossed over the road and very seriously and permanently injured a young boy. And the thing about that case was that he was convicted in the lower court. He appealed it all the way to the New Hampshire Supreme Court, saying that the evidence did not indicate on a criminal basis that he had engaged in reckless driving. So the court looked at that and analyzed it, and only about 3 or 4 pages said, now, wait a minute. You took your eye off the road to the point where you crossed over and seriously and permanently injured a young boy. And they said, this is reckless conduct. This is reckless conduct because you engaged in conduct that you knew or should have known caused a substantial harm, a substantial danger to the public. And so that, the court said, was on a criminal basis, negligent, or I should say reckless operation of a motor vehicle. The thing that's important about that, we tend to talk about civil law on About the Law, is that the criminal standard, as you know, is beyond all reasonable doubt. And the court upheld his reckless driving conviction. The civil standard, which would apply to an accident case, is by a preponderance of the evidence. So just by the fact that he was convicted criminally and upheld at the New Hampshire Supreme Court says that more than enough evidence existed to prove that he was reckless, negligent, and otherwise caused the serious injuries to the young guy.
And it's like interesting to think of because it's just like a lot of the time is just like looking at your phone and thinking that you're just going to send a quick message. It's like you don't really think that, anything serious is going to be happening. And to see like it being upheld in such a strong standard kind of shows the gravity of what you're doing. This is a horrible case. It is just like, a lot of the times you're texting and driving, you're not thinking that you're going to horribly hurt this kid for the rest of his life. But even like driving down, because I do a lot of driving, I drive back and forth to New York. A lot of the times, like you see what I call the New York slide, is that there's a car usually in the middle lane that just starts slowly drifting off to one of the other lanes, and then they realize what's happening and they just completely switch to that other lane without putting on their blinker. But it's just like if you find yourself in that situation, that's just unacceptable. Like you were distracted for so long enough that you didn't even realize that you weren't in your lane anymore. Sometimes you'll be driving and you like start getting into the other lane when you're actually paying attention, and that just kind of goes to show like how intense not paying attention, like how severe that can be.
And that's universal. It doesn't have to be New York. I mean, New York drivers have a reputation. Massachusetts drivers have a reputation, but it even happens in New Hampshire. That New Hampshire case that I was just talking about is the state of New Hampshire versus Chad Belleville, New Hampshire Supreme Court case. There's also a Massachusetts case that I think is interesting, Commonwealth versus Richard DiPremio. And in that case, the fellow was driving along and he went into the oncoming lane. People that were behind him said it was snowing, raining, sleeting. Those days that we get in the winter in New Hampshire, I guess the weather people call it a wintry mix because you don't know what it's doing from one minute to the next. The people that were behind this guy in the Massachusetts case said that he was weaving and going all over the road. He never used his turn signal. He never used his brakes, even though it was bad weather and the road was very curvy. And he finally ended up going in, kind of like the New York situation you just mentioned. He ended up going into the oncoming lane. And he was convicted in a district court. And then he appealed that to the Massachusetts Appeals Court and said, oh, this isn't enough evidence to show that this is negligent operation of a motor vehicle. And the court took a look at what had happened in that case, that people testified that he was weaving in the snow, ice, sleet, whatever it was. He was going back and forth. He wasn't using his turn signals. One of the witnesses said that she was following him and they were going very fast. So the court took a look at all of that and said, look, this is negligence. You have a duty to drive in a reasonably safe manner with the understanding that the other people on the road are relying on you following all the rules. You breached that duty to the other drivers and caused harm. So there again, that's the criminal standard by a preponderance, excuse me, that's the criminal standard beyond all reasonable doubt that he was driving negligently. And his excuse, what he told the officer was that, and excuse me, he was reaching across the passenger's side to get a cup of coffee. He actually testified that he had been reaching across the passenger side to get a cup of coffee when his car went off the road. So these are things that happen. These are things that happen every day, unfortunately, on the road. And it doesn't make it any better that we have the weather that we do in New England, does it?
I mean, it's one thing, I guess, for me. I think it's insane that these people are even trying to put up any argument against like any of the situation when it's just like you're clearly at fault, you clearly hit someone. It's crazier to me, which maybe, which is ironic because I have like a little van, but it's just like I have heart attacks like when the road is not good. It's just like that's like the time when you're going like below the speed limit where you're paying the most attention. So, and where they have all these witnesses to say that he was driving like however he wants to drive, that also just goes to shows like maybe he was reaching over to get that coffee at one point, but it's just like all this other like chaos is happening on the road. Is just like this person, like maybe in that moment where they hit someone, they are going to grab that coffee. But when it's that type of road situation, is just like how far are you driving that it's really worth it. And like furthermore is just like if the getting the coffee is like what caused the accident, imagine all those other things that they were potentially doing before that happened.
Yeah, they say that when people are, a slightly different topic, but they say that when people are stopped for drunk driving, it's likely that they've probably done that 8 or 9 times before and they didn't get caught. So I understand your point that these are, only 2 cases out of many, but it happens every day, all the time. It happens regularly on all of our roads. New Hampshire, Massachusetts, New York, Connecticut in between has horrible highways. In my opinion, having spent a lot of time driving the highways in Connecticut, they're all not so great in terms of the drivers. Not that the roads are bad, but the thing that's striking to me is that the criminal standard is a very high standard. It's beyond all reasonable doubt, and our true crime fans out there will know that in order to get a criminal conviction, whether it's murder or driving recklessly or any other criminal charge, the proof that the state, I was going to say Commonwealth, but the proof that any prosecutor needs to rise to is beyond all reasonable doubt. And that's a very, very high standard. Any prosecutor will tell you that they've got a very heavy burden before they go into court. But reaching across and grabbing a cup of coffee meets that burden, and other conduct, eating crackers and spilling them on yourself, spilling coffee on yourself and looking down. Those things in the cases have actually been shown to be beyond a reasonable doubt. So, from a legal standpoint, not only is it a violation of these, statutes, that the drunk driving, not the drunk driving, the distracted driving laws that we talked about, over and above that, it is criminal conduct that can land you in a lot of trouble.
I mean, a lot of the times it doesn't really feel like we're doing much in those situations. A lot of the times you don't really think anything of it. But at the end of the day, it's just like you hit someone, like that's your fault. And it's like a lot of the time, whether, it's distracted or not. And a lot of the times when people are driving, we're not leaving the space that we need to for the car in front of us. Um, a lot of times, and especially in New Hampshire, you see it all the time where a lot of people are speeding. And how Andrew mentioned, it's just like a lot of times that people get caught when they're doing something like drunk driving or texting while driving. It's not the first time that they're doing it. And I think it's important to realize the negative implications that your actions may have, and that, a lot of the time you're well, driving what, 15 minutes. Maybe you have an hour long commute. Maybe you're sitting in stop and go traffic. A lot of the times when you're in that stop and go traffic, that's when you're going to see a lot of these people getting rear-ended and things like that, just because you're not paying attention. When the car ride's a little bit boring, a lot of the times that's when you need to be paying attention the most, because once you feel comfortable, that's when it becomes a dangerous situation.
Right, right. And a lot, it's not just texting and driving. It's not just talking on the phone and driving. It's not just eating and driving, which are presented to people as like the number one distracted driving. But there's a lot of things that people don't even think about. I had a case once where I represented the rear seat passenger who was seriously injured in an accident because the driver and the front seat passenger were fighting over what music to listen to. They was back in the days when everybody had CDs, and they were reaching down for a CD and fighting over which CD to put in the car. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
people don't even think what it is that they're doing could present a lot of danger. I get back to my pilot. When I'm on an airplane, I want that pilot focused 100% on taking the plane off and landing the plane. Okay, once you get up to 35,000 feet, put it on autopilot. But I want the pilot paying attention to that airplane, and I want other drivers on the highway paying attention to the road. That's how I feel.
And how you mentioned like the people fighting over the CDs, that's like another good point, where I'm sure this happens to other people, but for me personally, like I'll have people in the car. As soon as there's other people in the car, it's just like my focus to driving immediately, like I'm zoomed in, focused on the road, because even just people talking around me is so crazy. Even just having one passenger is like a lot, because it's just like, oh no, there's a person here. Like if they're not like distracting themselves, they might be trying to talk to me. And it's just like it's hard to listen and keep your eyes on the road and make sure that you're paying attention to all these little things that can happen when you're driving.
Can I say one thing that you might edit out? I'm going to tell you a story that you might edit out. I don't know. I'll leave it up to
That
you.
was not gonna get edited.
I had an accident case one time where a young woman came to my office and she had suffered, I guess we'll call it a neck injury and a jaw injury in an accident. And she came in with her boyfriend, and they came to my office and I talked to them. And then she had to go to the hospital. And something didn't make sense to me about how they explained this accident. It just didn't make sense to me. So the young woman actually wanted to talk to me, and she wanted me to come into the hospital. So I went to the hospital and I talked to her, and I was asking her more questions, and she didn't want to answer them. And I asked more questions, and she really didn't want to ask them. Then she finally told me how the accident happened. And how the accident happened was this. Her boyfriend was driving, and she was leaning over, and her head was down below the console doing something that maybe boyfriends and girlfriends do in their private time, but they were driving, and she was engaging in this activity. And at a certain time, he went off the road, hit a telephone pole, and she suffered a head injury on the console, a jaw injury, and a neck injury. You might want to edit that out. I
Saying
didn't
it.
know. But that was a crazy, crazy case. She was injured. She was injured. He wasn't, surprisingly, but the things people do. And again, I return to my central point. I want the pilot paying attention to the airplane, and I want people paying attention to the driving.
It's like wild to me that like these people, like in pretty much every situation that we've talked about, it's like these people are at fault and they still try to get out of
It's crazy.
it.
It's crazy. You laugh, but every now and then, I told you before, I've been blogging for 10 or 12 years now. Every now and then people get mad at me. They get mad at something that I've said. And as we teased in the very beginning of this podcast, there's one type of accident that takes place, a specific type of accident that takes place when people are doing something else and not paying attention. And the answer that I gave made a lot of people mad. And do you want to read the post that I got?
Yep. So I have right here. Dear Attorney Myers, one night it was extremely dark and I backed into a car. It was a tow-away zone and there aren't supposed to be any vehicles parked there. I go to this place all the time, so I did not expect there to be a vehicle there. Am I at fault if I hit a parked car that was in a tow-away zone?
Okay, here is my answer. Here's your problem. You were moving and the parked car was not. The car you struck may have been illegally parked in violation of ordinances, statutes, and all the rest, but the negligence formula requires a look at conduct. You were in control of the vehicle that was moving. The other car was stopped like a rock. So technically, it is your fault. Look at it like this. Although the other car's driver left the vehicle in a bad place, you had the last clear chance to stop a collision. There is, in fact, a legal doctrine known as last clear chance, which will not be your friend in that the parked car, although in the wrong place at the wrong time, did nothing in the moment before the crash to cause the damage. Now, to be fair, some jurisdictions have abandoned the last clear chance doctrine. Comparative fault or contributory negligence formulas now are used to look at the facts and circumstances leading up to a collision. Proportional fault is then assigned to each of the parties. Under this concept, parking the car in a tow zone violated an ordinance or other law largely intended for public safety and traffic control. But that was not what caused the actual collision. Starting up the car and backing into the stopped vehicle caused the crash. Under either analysis, the result is the same. So hopefully you have insurance and everything was taken care of that way.
Anytime you hit someone, it's your fault if you're the one hitting them, even if they're not supposed to be there. Like, you're the one in control. You have the responsibility to stop, even if the other cars say they're parked illegally, they're still not moving. It's still your fault in that situation, it sounds like.
In this situation, actually, yes, but I've been really surprised at the really anger that people have expressed to me and all the different permutations of the facts in that case. Different people have sent me different descriptions of their negligence that they don't want to admit to. For example, someone will say, well, I was backing out of my driveway and there was a delivery truck that pulled up across the street and I hit it. Shouldn't it have not been there? And I mean, when you're backing a car, you have a duty to continuously look behind your shoulder. You don't just look and go, okay, now I can back the car. I mean, you have a duty. And what I've told the many people that have gotten angry at me about that response was, if you ever have a situation like that where you back into an illegally parked or a suddenly parked vehicle and you win, send me the court decision or send me a piece of correspondence from an insurance company that found that you were not at fault, and I will post it on my website. And it hasn't happened.
You know what? That offer is still out there. So, if the court ever rules in your favor, you know who to let know. So that way we can post about it.
I will. Absolutely.
However, I just want to say thank you guys so much for watching. And whether or not you get that court case in your favor or you just want to check out more of Andrew's content, you can check out his website.
Yes, please check our website out at attorney-myers.com, attorney-myers.com, and feel free to contact us if you have a case that you'd like to talk to us about, if you have been injured, if you have had a slip and fall, if you've had a motor vehicle collision, or anyone that you know or love has been injured through no fault of their own. Contact us and let us know what we can do to help you.
Of course. And if you liked this video and you want to see more content like it, be sure to subscribe to our channel, consider giving our video a like, and consider sharing it with your friends. It really does help us a lot. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been About the Law.
Thank you.
You have been watching About the Law, a production of the law offices of Andrew D. Myers in Methuen in the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts and Derry, New Hampshire. Please give us a like and subscribe. The foregoing is offered for informational purpose only. It is not intended as, nor does it constitute, legal advice. Laws vary widely from state to state. You should rely only on the advice given to you during a personal consultation by a local attorney who is thoroughly familiar with state laws and the area of practice in which your concern lies.